routes, which is quite normal, because how could they go to China or Japan if they did not follow the or did not use the Portuguese big ships? So the traders were first. The missionaries came immediately second. And there was a big difference. The traders normally stayed for a short time. If many of them did not write anything about the culture they met. There are exceptions. But the missionaries were men of high learning, especially the missionaries coming from Southern Europe, who were very much influenced by the humanist culture. They knew their classics. They were, in that sense, very European. Men formed by philosophy, by Latin and Greek classics. And now they encountered the new cultures of China, of Japan, and they were very much challenged. Because what they saw, what they experienced every day, did not fit into the frame they had brought from Europe of understanding the world. I would like to give you one example. It was common in Europe to think that you can only have a moral conduct if you are a Christian believer. So if you are not Christian, it would be impossible to have an ethical conduct. That was believed for centuries in Europe. And you can see that this kind of theology also was a product of a closed Europe. Now the missionaries came to Japan. They thought they would meet barbarians. And they were ready for that. Then they found a very high civilized society. A very sophisticated society. And they found that already the letters of Francis Xavier, that Japanese do not lie as Europeans do. Japanese people do not steal as Europeans do. And that is still true today. You know that the crime rate of Tokyo is only 1% of the crime rate of New York. So they found a people which was not Christian with very high ethics. And they transmitted that knowledge to Europe. You know, the Jesuits were very good propagandists. They wrote letters. We have to write letters. Even today in the Society of Jesus, reports to our superiors in Europe. But many of these letters got published. And the publication of these letters was something very important because it was news about a new world that people did not know. They described the plants, the animals, and many, some small things again, not so important, but you know that one of the big diseases at the time, which was very mortal, were the pox. The Chinese already used vaccination against the pox. The Jesuits transmitted the way of this vaccination, which was then introduced into Europe. And Louis XV died of the pox because he refused to be vaccinated. But that's just a small example to show but that these highly organized societies and cultures had a very high morality or something new. It was very different from the experience of Latin America. Because in Latin America, they were confirmed in their small view of the world. You have the Aztecs in Mexico sacrificing people, tearing their hearts out of their bodies in order to sacrifice to the gods. These were the pagans people had in mind when they set sail to the New World. But Japan and China were different. And you know, if you have a history of philosophy, a history of ideas, you find the French philosopher Pierre Bell, who in Amsterdam wrote his Dictionnaire Philosophique, his philosophical dictionary, saying that you can be a moral person without being a Christian. And in the school books today, it gets presented as something that Enlightenment discovered, and it is true. But Enlightenment discovered this because there were the letters of the missionaries. I would now like a little bit to speak about the mission in China, which was had very great repercussions in Europe. As I said, the Jesuits published a lot about China. Already Trigault, a French Jesuit, published the account of Ricci and his first companions in China. Later on, the Jesuits were the first to translate Confucian philosophy into Latin. It was published in Paris, Confucius Sinarum Philosophus, Confucius, the philosopher of the Chinese, which put him on the same level as Aristotle, who was the philosopher of the West. And you have, for instance, 34 small volumes published by the French Jesuits, Lettres édifiantes et curieuses, edifying and curious letters. Curious does not mean curious in our way, but it means new things that we want to discover, something we do not know yet. And in these letters, the main part is China. And a lot of new things of China get transmitted. But this discovery of China to Europe was completely new. Europe did not know anything about China. You know that before in the Middle Ages there was the Milione, the book of Marco Polo. But he never used the word China. He spoke about Katai. When Ricci was in China, people even did not know that the Katai of Marco Polo and the China of Ricci were the same country. A Jesuit brother, Benito Gorge, went from India, traveled to China, the land route. And then he discovered that China and Katai was the same country. You know, because people were thinking of a big Christian country. They were led astray by Muslim traders who told the missionaries in India that there's a huge Christian country. You know the name of that country, that's Tibet. Because the Muslims could not make the difference between there's monkhood in Buddhism and in the Catholic Church, there is incense, there are images, so they sort of would be more or less the same. Benito Gorge was the first person to travel to Tibet, to China. And these people were pioneers and they transmitted their knowledge to Europe. And first of all, they said China is a very ancient country, much elder than France or Germany or the different Italian states. And people in Europe did not all believe it. Because, as you know, the book of history, or the textbook of history, was the Bible. And people said, now, Jesuits, let's get serious. We have read the Bible. The Bible doesn't say anything about China. So this China you speak about cannot be so great and cannot be so important and ancient as you write about. Otherwise, our law, when he dictated the Bible, would surely have mentioned China. And that was a big problem for the first missionaries when they spoke about China in Europe. And there was a very abstruse theory. You know, in Rome, in the Roman college, there was a German Jesuit, Athanasius Kircher, who was a kind of genius